Dr. Barbara Becker Holstein, positive psychologist, author, and filmmaker, along with her colleague, Debbie Storrs Higgins, film critic, director, and producer, have designed a treat for you. Want to be uplifted, taken back to happy and pleasant memories from a saner time? Then sit back, relax, and listen to Dr. Barbara and Debbie as they explore from their past everything fit to print that is funny, uplifting, and even miraculous.
Welcome back to Old Time Radio. It's been a little while. Debbie and I have been getting very, very sad that we haven't gone ahead and dived into some of the wonderful memories that go with the concept of old time radio. The radio that my mother would put on when I was a little girl so we could see the adventures of Helen Trent, the poor soul that was still trying to find love at 35. So here we are. We thought it would be fun to continue that whole tradition. And now I am going to tell you that Debbie Higgins, who is my producer in my films, is here. She'll say hello. And then we have a guest, Cheryl, who is an author and all sorts of other careers. She'll introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Debbie Higgins. Yes, I do produce Barbara's films, and I work in the film business as a critic as well. And old time radio is a great thing because so many people on the radio and whatever medium really don't say what they feel and about their lives. They tell what they think you want to hear in today's culture. So Barbara and I strip away, bare our souls to the extent that we're not going to get anybody in trouble, saying names of the past in our lives. And it's really kind of cathartic, and our listeners really like it because we're genuine, we're real, we make mistakes. And that's part of, I think people want nostalgia. They don't realize how much they do want it because of all this technology. So that's as much as I'm going to say, and then we'll go to Cheryl.
Hi, I am Cheryl Malandrinos. I am an author and an editor and a realtor. I'm the mother of 3, been married for, I think we're going on 23 years now. And I've been blessed to know Barbara for many, many years as we've worked on a variety of projects. And I'm just thrilled to be here with you ladies today.
Well, it's wonderful to have both of you with me because this is one of those female journeys that is so nice to do with women you trust and get a good chuckle and laugh as we bring up certain things and stuff. So today we're going to focus a lot on family, romance, silly things, love of pets, just the things that kind of make our day very often. And Debbie and I had brainstormed a little bit, and I'll start with one thing which will probably pop, your minds, and that is the way my parents met. I think it's such a sweet story that is different than today, and it involves understanding how people lived in general. So basically, my mother was the granddaughter of a woman who was quite wealthy and had a number of children, 9 that lived till adulthood. And she was she had this bearing and this grace that people came to her for advice from all over the area. Very special type of woman that I think was able to capture strength in a way that today sometimes we don't quite know how to get there. And so my great-grandmother was Sarah Watchmaker. My mother, Bernice Becker. Well, she became Bernice Becker. She was Bernice Silverman. So what my great-grandmother would do was invite different grandchildren and great-grandchildren to go away with her, which of course was a real treat, and she paid all the fees and whatever. So my mother had gone with her to some sort of beautiful hotel, all those hotels like in the White Mountains that used to look so regal and like castles practically, and the rolling hills, the mountains, the horses, the whole thing. And they're sitting on the front porch. Meanwhile, there's a young man next to my mother who sees a beautiful woman and he can't resist. He starts talking to her, and she's not getting it. She doesn't feel anything for him. He's talking to her. He's trying to set up maybe we'll have tea later. Maybe we could go for a walk. And she's really resisting, but being polite. Of course, she would be polite, sitting next to this regal grandmother. So suddenly a car comes up, what they used to call a roadster, which was a kind of small car, probably the kind of car that got in trouble, and you'd see the guy by the road desperately trying to fix something. And so the man next to my mother suddenly turned to her and said, look, this is going nowhere. And I know you're going to marry this man that's coming into the building now. And that was my father. I mean, she was kind of shocked that he said that. And certainly she didn't fall in love like instantly. But he was absolutely right. And she married him in less than a year from then. So that's my little introductory story.
Well, should I tell my way my parents met?
Yeah.
It's interesting. My father was living in Asbury Park. He was divorced. And my mother was much younger. She was 20 years younger. But both of them had to work on Thanksgiving Day in New York City. My mother was a copy woman's editor for the New York Times. She had just come out of Columbia, and the Times had taken her right off because she ran the paper in her college too. And my father was getting on the train in Asbury. She was getting on the train in Elizabeth. So my father was walking through the cars, and he saw her and he said, "Good morning, princess. Why are you on the train?" My mother was beautiful. She looked like Grace Kelly. And my father had started his career in film. He was the stand-in for Ramon Navarro. I don't know if anybody knows him. He was the original Ben-Hur. And my father was going to work at McGraw-Hill in New York. So she didn't hear what he said, princess, and she thought that he was very ungrammatical. And he had said, "What are you doing here, for instance?" And she thought, boy, this guy, he's really handsome, but please. And then when they got to the city, there were a few restaurants where everybody went. And one was, I think it was Cafe des Artistes. And my mother was there, and my father was there for lunch as well. And she asked people about him, and they said, "Oh God," they said my dad's name, and "Oh, Mel's just the greatest guy on earth." So he saw her on the train again another time, and he asked her out, and they went out. And my mother, she ended up being the fashion editor of the New York Times, and my father ended up being the president of McGraw-Hill. So after that, when they got married, they had an apartment on 57th Street in New York, and then they bought a house in Allenhurst, a big house. And believe it or not, at the time, those big houses were being given away. So my father paid $13,000 for our house, which had 21 rooms in it, 9 bedrooms. But that's how they met. And and they had a charmed love affair. I never saw them fight. They were crazy about each other for the whole time they were married. That's my parents' story.
Do you have a family story too, Cheryl? It doesn't necessarily have to be how your parents met, but something that relates to family life.
Well, that's good, because I honestly have no idea how my parents met.
Oh, that's too bad.
Well, with them, I know that they were both lived in the same area, and my mother's been gone a long time now, and so both of them were change of life babies. So they're both the youngest in their family. Like my father's closest sibling was 10 years older than us. So it's a different dynamic, because it's like all of our cousins are so much older than us. So my mother looked very similar to me, to like a Annette Funicello in her younger days. And she had beautiful dark hair. And I wish I had gained that beautiful dark hair, but I did not. But she was just such a wonderful lady, unless you crossed her.
Mm.
And she, so, and I don't mean that in a bad way. She was just known to be this very strong woman, and very involved in church, very involved in our lives. She didn't work until we were older, until I was older. But we called her the Tiger Lady, because she was just this woman who you never knew when she would pounce, and not in a bad way. She was very protective of us as her children. And I remember I was at school, and I had a little accident. But I was also a very quiet person, so I didn't ask to go to the little girl's room. And so I had an accident. And luckily, I went to school right across from my house. And so what did I do? I ran home. Because in those days, you could do that. You could walk out of the school building and there wasn't an Amber Alert, that kind of thing,
Nice.
And so I walked home. And I told her, well, we can't go to the bathroom unless we go to lunch. And so I had an accident. Oh my goodness. That was probably, I fleshed out that little part of the story where I didn't ask the teacher if I could go to the bathroom. Oh, she wrote a scathing note. And then, of course, found out afterwards that I left out that little detail. And she was good about it, but she really just was very protective of us as children.
It's sad that our parents are gone, and there were so many things we wish we could ask them now. And when they were here and they told us stories again and again, we were like, oh, yeah, I know, I heard that. But I mean, it's just, there's so much on my family tree. I just don't even know. But that makes me think of something, Barbara. Remember, we were going to talk about, and it's a good segue from what Cheryl said about embarrassing things when we were a kid.
Yeah.
That just mortified us. So tell a mortification, if that's the proper word, story when you were a child.
Well, I have one that goes with just the what you're saying. But before I say that, I want to just mention how interesting it is that we all had strong women in our families. And that's very, very important. It makes a big difference in how women are able to proceed in the next generation. And of course, that most women 1 or 2 generations back didn't have it easy. So if they could keep their strength up and become, show exactly like their lion traits or whatever was the strength they carried, good for them, because very often their husbands were very standard men who wanted their slippers and their supper on time. That was the age. But here's my funny little story. I played the violin since I was 9, which means that my mother would pray that I would close the door. She couldn't stand it. My father, who wanted to have, I guess, someone special in the family that would have a talent, come on, Barbara, it's fine, you can do it. Well, I really wasn't very good, but I kept going, and I had a wonderful teacher, Mr. Masters. It was a delight, lovely to me. I go to his home, his wife and babies were there, and, they were just nice, nice people. So he decided that I was doing well enough that I should invite my mother, and she should hear me play this sonata or whatever it was that I had partially memorized on the violin. So my mother came in and we went to his studio and the whole thing started. And now my mother was very humorous and could come up with a joke and a laugh, but I couldn't understand why she was laughing hysterically. This was supposed to be a kind of concert that I was privately giving her. And I was getting really angry at her. Anyway, I finished and she clapped. It's very nice, Barbara. And now, let's go. And as soon as we were out of hearing of this little family we had left, she said, didn't you know that you had a piece of toilet paper hanging from you know where, and it was swaying as you were playing? And she said, I couldn't control myself. I'm just sorry. I couldn't.
Oh,
That's
that's
a
like a
riot.
tough one.
Oh my goodness.
Of course, I wasn't aware. So,
Well, here's my horrible story, which it's affected me up to this day when I see this boy who's a man now. And I asked him about it finally. He never remembered it at all. And my whole life, it was like, I was invited to a birthday party. And I was kind of a lonely child because my parents worked in the city. They came home on weekends. And I had horses all my life. So my best friend was my horse always, or my dog. And I got invited to a birthday party in town. And I went over to the party, and, you feel a little awkward because a lot of the kids all knew each other from town. And then when I was sent to school, I was sent to private school. So I didn't go to the school that all the kids went to either, but I loved it. So it was fine. It didn't damage me. I'm not in therapy because of anything. And I had to go to the bathroom. So everybody's partying and they're blowing things and, having hats on and cake. And I went into the bathroom and I thought that I had locked the door, and it was serious bathroom. It wasn't just 1 second in there. And all of a sudden, somebody wanted to come in and the door wasn't locked, and they opened the door, and I was on the toilet with my pants down in front of all the kids. So they slammed the door, it was a boys' party, and I sat in there. I got up quietly and tried to lock the door again, which I did. And I sat in there, I don't know, 45 minutes until I didn't hear feet or laughing. They must have gone outside. And then I came out and I snuck home to my parents. And I was just the most mortified person. And I asked the boy, I said, do you remember, Jerry, when that happened at the party? And he goes, I don't even know what you're talking about, Deb. I don't even remember the party. But it's funny how things will stick with you. And that was I was mortified. That's my story. So.
But it's funny that he doesn't remember it at all either, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there are so many ways in which men and women are just different in how they approach things.
Exactly.
And for him, it was a blip.
I know.
And then, okay, it was funny for a while, and then he forgot about it. But for you, it was one of those times where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe this happened to me. And you've carried it with you and you remember it.
But it's like you, Cheryl, where you had to go home. I never would do that at school. I would hold, I just wanted to be in my parents' house, So anyway, Barbara, we have other topics.
Let's see if Cheryl has something to.
Oh, yeah. Well, Cheryl had her toilet story before. That's what segued us into it. But
yes.
Anything else, Cheryl?
Oh, I'm sure there are tons of mortifying stories in my life. So in high school, so I was a little bit of a nerd, and like you, Debbie, I had gone to private school for 8 years. So then I was thrust into this public high school, and which I found very tough to navigate. And I'm telling you, every year, the first day of the year, I would get lost. You'd think the building was like the Taj Mahal, the way I would get lost every year. I would screw up the schedule. Right? So for some reason, some kids thought it was going to be really cute to ask me out, have some guy ask me out as a joke. Only I was not in on said joke. So he had asked me out, and I was dating very young. Not that I would recommend that to my daughters, but I was dating very young. And I was with who ended up being my son's father at the time. So we're sitting there, and this guy asks me out. I'm like, well, I don't know. Can I think about it? Because I think he's serious, right? No. So I get back to him a few days later, and he goes, you think I would date you? A big thing with his friends, him and his friends, that this was like this joke.
Oh.
And and of course that conversation happened in the middle of the school hallway during like period change, when we're changing classes. So yeah, that was a tough one, but But luckily, you know, I got over it. And you know what they say, you know, the things that don't kill you make you stronger. So it was tough, but you know, that was so many years ago. And I'm sure if I asked, and I see that guy at high school reunions all the time. If I mentioned that to him, he'd have no recollection.
Right, exactly. No recollection. Yep. Oh, that hurt me to listen to your story.
I listen to it too, because I have a couple of stories. They're so hurtful, I'm not even prepared to tell them at this point. But I thought that maybe I'll get there, but not yet. One of the things that I thought we might talk about is sort of the ridiculous things that happen. And for me, I'm very at ease to talk about that. Maybe because my mother was so funny at times, and because I don't know, somehow I get a kick out of the crazy misinterpretations I've made in life, so to speak. But that's different than being hurt by a particular guy, you know? So here's my story that involves a guy, but only incidentally. And it's the story of the electric blanket. So I was dating a fellow that, like many of us go through in college and or even before or after, I knew he wasn't the one. I knew I was going to have to dump him, as they say, you know, at some point. But New Year's Eve was coming up and needed plans, and I wasn't ready. You know, I wasn't ready to dump him. It sounds so So anyway, he invited me to his home, which was a lovely place. His parents were very gracious, sort of classy people, definitely classier than my parents in style. And we had a dignified dinner, and I don't remember what we then did, but it was bedtime, and I was to have the room that connected to the parents' bathroom. And I don't know where the fellow went, somewhere in the house. So it's very, very, very cold. And his mother explained, here's an electric blanket if you want it, and whatever, showed me the rules of the room, and that the bathroom was in between. They left, they disappeared. I finally got into bed and decided, of course, you know, it was nice and cozy. I was glad I had the electric blanket. So some minutes passed, and I begin to wonder if I began to wonder, and I also had these feelings of trembling in my body, and I began to wonder if I was being overheated by the electric blanket. And then I began to wonder if I could get a shock from the electric blanket. And then I began to wonder if I was going to die that night, maybe partly because I knew I had to break up with this guy. Anyway, these thoughts got bigger and bigger and bigger, particularly around, am I going to die? Because something's going to happen with this electric blanket. So I finally sort of got this big thing of energy, and I jumped out of the bed and I put on the light, and then I discovered that the electric blanket had never been plugged in.
So you imagined that it was hot?
I imagined all of it, yes.
Oh my goodness.
All of it.
I love that story, but I've heard it before, but I forgot that it wasn't plugged in.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
Those were the early hot flashes, right?
That's right.
It tells you what your mind can do.
Tells
You
you
know, when
what
you're
your mind
overthinking
can
and you're all crazy.
Yep, particularly if you're in conflict in the first place, you know.
Right, exactly.
That's my story of how crazy we can be.
I can tell my Sadie Hawkins story if you'd like. I went to, as like Cheryl, we went to private schools, all girls with nuns who were very, very tough, sisters of charity, and they didn't care. And if they hit you, your parents would go, you must have done something terrible. They always sided with the nuns. And I ended up going to Red Bank Catholic, which all the kids came from St. James, which was the grammar school. So when I got to Red Bank Catholic, I didn't even know how a locker opened or anything. And in the end of I guess it was around October, we started in September, they had a thing called the Sadie Hawkins dance. And you were supposed to ask a boy. And one of the boys in my homeroom was so nice and so sweet. I asked him to the dance. And he said, no, I don't want to go with you. So I was like, oh my God, that was it. My first foray into the man world. And it just was mortifying to me. There's that word again. And about a month or two later, I opened my locker, which I guess he had the combination because he had taught me how to open a locker. And there was a little bottle of Love's Lemon. Now, Love was a cosmetic company back then that was really trendy, and they made this beautiful perfume that was lemon, or I guess it was cologne, it wasn't perfume. And he had bought me a bottle. And then he asked me out on a date. And he said he told his brother, and his brother said, don't ever burn a bridge that you intend to maybe have to walk over again. And that was my boyfriend. And I dated him from that Christmas straight through to half of my first year of college. And we got engaged after high school. And I broke it off because I met somebody in college that I was just crazy for, which was terrible. So, but that's my Sadie Hawkins story. So when I hear those words, I always go, no. That's it.
My husband and I didn't date in high school, but we went to high school together. We graduated together. We actually worked together. And I was with my son's father at the time, and things were not going very well. And a group of us in the evenings would get together on Friday nights after work, and we would go out to the local pub, I guess they'd call it these days, local pub, hang out, whatever. And then eventually things fell apart, between my son's father and I moved home or whatever. So we started going, Friday nights we'd go to the pub, hang out with the friends from work, and then we would go back to his parents' house because he lived with his parents at the time, and we'd hang out in his room and do, play games and whatever. And one night we're just sitting there, we're talking, and he says to me, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but you have really pretty eyes. Well, I don't know how a girl could take that the wrong way, but okay, I took it well. And we started getting a little smoochy, and we're starting to make out a little bit, whatever. And it's got to be about 12 o'clock, it's got to be 12 o'clock at night. And his father trucks up the stairs, knocks on the door, walks in, sees us, making it, shuts the door, disappears. A few minutes later, knock, knock, knock. Mom comes up to handle the situation. And it was just so fun because in my husband's very brief household, the man who rules the roost, right? But when bad things had to, when bad news had to be delivered or there was a scolding, it was definitely Mom who had to come up and take care of it. It was embarrassing, but it was funny all at the same time. And now we just laugh about it because it was just one of those silly stories where, in the infancy of our relationship, here we were being scolded by my husband's mom.
Oh, geez.
It was pretty funny.
Cheryl, after that, did she treat you differently?
Well, so we were not allowed to go up to his room for a long time. And you have to realize we were at that time, I must have been 21, 22.
Really? Oh my goodness.
So we were not allowed upstairs for quite a while. And then eventually he put his foot down and he said, listen, you know what? I'm a grown man and we're going to go upstairs. We want to go upstairs, that kind of thing. But, it's good to be respectful of your parents' wishes and his parents are wonderful people. So that helps too. They had a really good relationship. and I adore my in-laws.
I bet the mother remembers it though. I bet she remembers that day.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh boy. I
So,
thought you were going to be like 15 and you were 21. Goodness.
yeah. I don't know if that would fly in today's world, but it's sweet. In its own way, it gets sweet, as the years go by. Yeah. My mother-in-law liked me quite a bit, I think. Now, I do remember these are just vague memories. I thought I was in love with a fellow my senior year of college, and he was studying to be a doctor. That was big in those days. Doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. There was some sort of, you grew up with some sort of essence about if someone was headed toward a certain type of professional role. Of course, it could have been if he were a good actress or actor or something, but in the real world of ordinary people, there was status with certain professions. Well, his mother didn't like me, and I'm not exactly sure why, except for the two things that he managed to pass on to me that she had said. And one was that I dressed like a gypsy, and the other was that I did not have a gold charm bracelet. So you can see how really, really high class this woman was, And unfortunately, because this fellow had a minor accident and ended up in the hospital, I guess it was, for a few days. And I, of course, because I thought he was my future husband, maybe, came and visited him a couple of times. She was there constantly. So having seen my clothing, I guess, in one visit, and then maybe my hand hadn't jingled with the right gold bracelet in the other hand, eventually, we were done within a couple of months. You don't know in retrospect what really led something to die. And it's a good thing it did, because I found my wonderful husband, but you don't know in those, and the maturity level is not there to fully even understand where other people are at, So I think most people probably have these really wonderful stories of hit or miss that go with being a kid or dating later on. And I wanted to just mention that Cheryl came on the scene to join us with what we're doing, because we want to make some books around old time stories. And Cheryl is a fabulous editor and puts things together in the writing world. And, sometimes I've thought that maybe what we're doing would even lend itself to people sending in their stories. And, I have a little bit of chicken soup fantasies going on in my head. So we'll see about that. But I will say that if anyone is intrigued, I want to just say that my email is barbara.holstein@gmail.com. You want to send in a story? Who knows? It might be the beginning of other stories. Meanwhile, we'll continue our stories, so to speak. And we talked, I know we're going to get off soon, but we talked about maybe the special role that animals play in our lives when we're growing up, that can be so critical to a kid. And for me, there is a brief story. I was an only child till I was 17 and a half. So at 10, 11, I was an only child, and I desperately wanted a pet. And I wanted a cat. cats appeal to me. That seemed to be my animal. And, you know, nothing ever happened. And my parents were busy both working night and day. And I guess they had all the usual feelings like she'll want it, then the kitty litter won't be changed. And, you know, the cat will scratch someone and whatever. So one day my mother got off the public bus with groceries because even though she had a license, oftentimes she didn't drive. There was only one car. And she had in her shopping bags a barbecued chicken. Now, anyone who has had barbecued chicken that's good knows how delicious it can smell when it's fresh.
Mm.
So this calico cat started to follow her home, meowing, 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 meowing. And she, you know, just kept going, and she didn't let it in immediately, but I guess her heart took over. She had it in the house, and I thought I was in heaven. But this was almost destroyed by the fact that about a couple hours later, when she was ready to serve dinner, the calico cat was busy eating the chicken that had been left on the counter. So that had to be integrated with my father, who was a stickler over every penny, and they had to be, and this might not work. But I begged and I begged and I begged, and he said, well, here's the final test. I will go across the street where there was a field, and I will get dirt. You see, there was no thought in those days to go to the store and buy a pan and kitty litter. Most people who had pets did what they needed to do in a home-based way. He took a cardboard box, he went across the street, he filled it with some dirt, he brought it in the house, in the back kitchen, and he said, let's see what happens. If she can use the box, she can stay. And about 2 hours later, we see the calico cat walk over and use the box. Very smart and very, you know, they understood. Cats, since Cleopatra, have known how to adjust to family life. So he said, okay, you have your cat. And that was the beginning of a wonderful romance where I was never disappointed or dropped.
Barbara, what was your cat's name?
Checkers.
Checkers. That's a great name. It's good. Cheryl, you have an animal story?
So I've had animals since I was a little kid. My father was not a huge animal fan, especially dogs, because he had been bitten as a child. So it took a long time for him to allow an animal in his house. And when he finally did, we ended up with a mini dachshund, which we named Fritz. And why Fritz? I don't know. That was what my mother wanted, right? And so Fritz, he was the cutest little thing, and I was the youngest child. And so my oldest sister is 7 years older than me, and my middle sister is 4 years older. So I was pretty much left to my own devices, but when I came along, you know, my mother didn't work until I was older, but you know, my father was gone all the time, and so people were off doing their things. I was pretty much left to my own, rather either figure my own entertainment or whatever. So Fritz and I became very friendly, and he was great unless you made him angry and you did something, and then he would go tinkle on your bed.
Oh, geez.
You know, we spent a lot of time in the backyard just playing around, and luckily he never went down the road. We lived over right in front of a river, our first house. So I had this constant nagging fear that somebody or Fritz was going to end up down the hill and in the river, which never happened. But it was nice to have that companion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, to pal around with.
Yeah.
I have a food story, and I didn't even think about it until Barbara talked about the barbecue chicken, but this was really something. First of all, I've always been a farmer. I've had every animal you can imagine. I mean, you can't name an animal that I haven't had, from monkeys to Cayman alligators to 29 horses I've had, to an ocelot, raccoons. I'm just an animal person. But I had a farm that I had everything on. And my son was of the age that I could go out and he would be home, you know, if I had to do something. So I made a big pot of tomato sauce with meatballs in it. And the meatballs were not dunked in the sauce. They were like sticking through, you know, out of the sauce. So I came home one night and I went in and I wondered if my son had eaten. And I looked in the pot and the top of the meatballs were all shaved off to where the tomato sauce was. And I thought, God, my kid is nuts. He needs to see like a shrink or something. Who goes in and cuts off the top of the meatballs all perfect with the top of the sauce? And he was sleeping. And so the next day I said, you know, to my son, why would you eat? Why wouldn't you just take a meatball out and eat it? He goes, Mom, I didn't do that. And my cat Merlin walked through the house and his whole face was orange tomato sauce. He had put his head in and had eaten the meatballs down to where the sauce was. And and it's like the cats always have food on the floor. They have dry food and wet food. I overfeed my animals. I always have. So this was the craziest thing in the world. And that was something that is a story that, you know, people love to tell about. The farm has so many stories, but that was hysterical, I thought.
Well, we're going to stop in a minute at this point. Cheryl, you think some of these stories will be good for topping off the little first book we're working on?
Yeah, I do think so. You know, I might do some editing, but that's okay. That's just my shtick. I always edit.
Of course. So we try to keep the show, you know, like 35, 40 minutes. We could go on for hours.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you for joining us. And I want to remind everybody, it is Valentine's Day. And I would like to just turn it into a message of, we've talked about family, we've talked about normal things, some irritating or some a little disappointing, you know, at times, but mostly the essence of what family life can mean, that it's a connection, it's a place to be loved and treasured and you can come home to. And I just hope that everybody finds a way or to be comfortable with their lives and the people that are in their lives. And if you're under stress, to still reach out and maybe get a card for one person or make a phone call, do something to bring sweetness into our life, because sweetness is kind of one of the major things that keeps us sane and happy and having a chuckle. And so happy Valentine's Day to everyone out there. And we will see you again next time with Old Time Radio. Bye for now.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Thanks for joining us. More information about Dr. Barbara Becker Holstein, including her award-winning selfie films, The Truth for Girls, books, films, downloads, stage play, podcasts, and TED-style talks, including a library of information for women of all ages, is available at enchantedself.com. That's enchantedself.com.